a small town, nestled deep within an old forest, stood the haunting silhouette of the Blackwood Asylum. Abandoned for decades, its history was stained with tales of suffering, torment, and unspeakable horrors. Once a place meant for healing, it had turned into a living nightmare for those unfortunate enough to be confined within its walls. It was said that the spirits of the tormented patients still roamed the halls, seeking revenge on anyone who dared to trespass. Despite these warnings, a group of 4 urban explorers decided to spend the night there. Billy, Gina, Logan, and Jen had a taste for the thrill, the unknown, and the gruesome. They had heard the stories, of course, but dismissed them as mere rumors. Urban legends meant to scare off curious souls, but the asylum called to them, promising an adventure like no other. The night was dark, with only the pale light of a crescent moon casting eerie shadows as they approached the asylum's rusted gates. The air was heavy with an ominous feeling, but the group pressed on, fueled by excitement and a bit of youthful arrogance. "Come on, it's just an old building," Billy said, trying to shake off the creeping sense of fear. He was the group's leader, always eager to prove himself. Gina, with her camera ready, rolled her eyes. "Yeah, and the stories are just fairy tales, right?" Logan, the quiet one, merely nodded while Jen shivered slightly, clutching her flashlight tightly. I don't know, guys, this place feels wrong." They pushed open the creaking gate, its sound echoing through the still night. The asylum loomed before them, its broken windows like empty eyes staring into their souls. As they stepped inside, the temperature seemed to drop, and the smell of decay and old memories filled their nostrils. The main hall was vast, with peeling wallpaper and furniture covered in dust. They set up their base in what seemed to be an old waiting room, unpacking their gear and preparing for the night ahead. On the counter, they found old patient records, yellowed with age and stained with what looked like blood. Gina picked up a file, reading aloud. "Patient 203 admitted for severe delusions and violent tendencies. Treatment, electroshock therapy, and isolation." "Poor souls," Logan muttered, shaking his head. "Let's split up and explore," Billy suggested, his voice filled with determination. "We'll cover more ground that way." Gina raised an eyebrow. "Haven't you ever seen a horror movie? Splitting up is the worst idea." But Billy was insistent. "We'll cover more ground. Besides, we have our walkie-talkies. We'll be fine." Reluctantly, they agreed and split into pairs. Billy and Gina took the east wing while Logan and Jen headed west. As Billy and Gina walked through the narrow, dimly lit corridors, the atmosphere grew heavy. The walls seemed to whisper, and every creak of the floorboards sounded like a distant scream. They reached a room called Treatment Room 3 and pushed the door open. Inside, they found old medical equipment, rusted and abandoned. Gina started taking pictures, the flash of her camera illuminating the room in stark, brief bursts. Suddenly, the temperature plummeted, and their breath became visible in the cold air. A chilling breeze swept through the room, and the door slammed shut behind them. They turned to see a shadowy figure standing in the corner. "Who's there?" Billy called out, trying to sound brave. The figure didn't respond. Instead, it moved closer, its form becoming clearer. It was a woman in a tattered hospital gown, her face twisted in a silent scream. Her eyes were hollowed, filled with an eternal anguish. Gina's camera flashed again, and the figure vanished, leaving behind a noticeable sense of evil. "Let's get out of here," Gina whispered, her voice trembling. Meanwhile, Logan and Jen explored the west wing, finding themselves in the asylum's old patient quarters. The rooms were small, each with a single bed and a barred window. The sense of despair was overwhelming. They reached a door marked Isolation Ward. Logan hesitated but pushed it open. Inside, they found rows of tiny, dark cells, each barely big enough for a person to stand. Why would they keep people like this? Jen asked, her voice breaking. Logan shook his head. This place was a nightmare. As they moved deeper into the ward, they heard a faint rhythmic tapping. It grew louder, echoing off the walls. They followed the sound to the last cell, where they found a small boy sitting on the floor, tapping a toy soldier against the wall. "Hey kid, are you okay?" Logan asked, stepping closer. The boy looked up, his eyes filled with terror and rage.
"You shouldn't have come here. They're coming for you,"
he whispered before vanishing into thin air. Panic set in as Logan and Jen realized they were not alone. Shadows moved at the edge of their vision, and the air grew thick with malevolence. They tried to retrace their steps, but the corridors seemed to twist and change, leading them deeper into the asylum's dark heart. Back in the East Wing, Billy and Gina were also lost, the building's layout shifting around them. They found themselves in the asylum's basement, a place of pure evil. The walls were covered in dark stains, and the air was heavy with the smell of rot. They stumbled upon a large iron door, its surface covered in deep scratches. As they approached, they heard faint cries for help coming from the other side. "We have to help them," Gina said, reaching for the door handle. Billy stopped her. "Wait, this feels wrong." Ignoring his warning, Gina pulled the door open, revealing a dark, cavernous room filled with old, rusted cages. Inside each was a figure, their eyes glowing with a sinister light.
"Please help us,"
one of them pleaded. But as they stepped closer, the figures' faces twisted into demonic grins. The door slammed shut behind them, and the figures began to reach through the bars, their fingers turning into claws. In the West Wing, Logan and Jen were running, their fear driving them forward. They burst into a room that seemed to be a morgue. Cold metal slabs lined the walls, and the smell of decay was overwhelming. "We have to find the others and get out of here," Jen said, tears streaming down her face. As they turned to leave, the doors of the slabs began to open, one by one. Corpses, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light, began to rise. They reached out with skeletal hands, their mouths opening in silent screams. Logan grabbed Jen's hand, pulling her through the door just as the corpses closed in. They ran, the asylum's walls seeming to close in around them. Billy and Gina, meanwhile, were trapped in the basement, the demonic figures closing in. They fought desperately, but the figures were too strong. Just as hope seemed lost, a blinding light filled the room, and the figures screamed, vanishing into the darkness. Logan and Jen burst into the room, their flashlights cutting through the gloom. They found Billy and Gina on the floor, bruised but alive. "We have to get out of here," Logan said, helping them to their feet. Together, they made their way through the twisting corridors, the asylum fighting to keep them trapped. Doors slammed shut, shadows moved in the corner of their eyes, and the air was filled with whispers of the damned. But they pressed on, their will to survive stronger than the asylum's evil. Finally, they burst through the front doors into the cold night air. They didn't stop running until they reached their car, the asylum's dark silhouette looming behind them. As they drove away, the building seemed to shrink into the distance, but its presence lingered, a dark shadow on their souls. They never spoke of that night again, the memories too painful, too terrifying. But the Blackwood Asylum remained, waiting for its next victims, its halls filled with the whispers of the damned and the souls of those who would never escape. Late one foggy evening, Chloe sat alone in her tiny apartment, the dim glow of her laptop casting eerie shadows on the walls. She had just moved to the city for a new job, far from her family and friends. The place was quiet, too quiet. Every creak of the floorboards and howl of the wind made her jump. Little did she know her life was about to take a dark, terrifying turn. It started with a package, a small, unmarked box left on her doorstep. There was no return address, no name. Chloe's heart raced as she picked it up. She shook it gently to see if she could feel the contents within the package. Inside, she found a single, withered black rose and a note written in neat, cursive handwriting. "Welcome to my game. Collect all the pieces or face the darkness. The Collector." She laughed it off, thinking it was a prank, but the unease gnawed at her. She threw the rose and the note in the trash and tried to forget about it. The next day, another package arrived. This time, it was larger. She hesitated, then opened it. Inside was an old, dusty music box. When she wound it up, it played a haunting tune that sent shivers down her spine. Another note. "Piece 2. Keep it safe." Chloe's hands trembled. She glanced around her apartment, half expecting someone to be watching her. But she was alone. She shoved the music box in a drawer and locked it, hoping that would be the end of it. The packages kept coming. A cracked mirror with strange designs carved into the frame. A pair of old, rusted scissors stained with something dark. Each one accompanied by a note from the Collector, urging her to keep going, to gather all the pieces. Chloe tried to ignore them, but each night she was haunted by nightmares. Faces she didn't recognize, screams, blood. She started researching, trying to find out who the Collector was, but came up with nothing. Her anxiety grew. She felt watched, stalked. The shadows in her apartment seemed to move on their own. One evening, after a particularly horrific nightmare, Chloe decided to throw all the items away. She couldn't take it anymore. As she gathered them into a box, she heard a whisper behind her. She spun around, but there was no one there. The air grew cold, and she felt a presence, something dark and evil. She dropped the box and backed away, heart pounding. The items began to move on their own, slowly inching toward her. She ran out of her apartment, slamming the door behind her. That night, she slept in her car, too terrified to go back inside. The next morning, she went back, hoping it was all just a bad dream, but the items were neatly arranged on her table, as if waiting for her. A new package sat beside them. Chloe's hands shook as she opened it, revealing a small, blood-stained doll. The note read, "You can't escape, Chloe. Finish the collection or suffer the consequences." Desperate, Chloe turned to the police. They took the items and the notes but found no fingerprints, no clues. They told her it was probably a sick joke, but she knew it was real. She could feel it. The next package was the worst. Inside was a human finger, perfectly preserved, with a ring still on it. Chloe screamed, dropping the box. The note was shorter this time. "Hurry, Chloe. Time is running out." She knew she had to find out who the Collector was, why this was happening to her. She spent days researching old newspapers, looking for any clues, and then she found it. A series of unsolved murders, each victim missing a body part. Each item she had received matched a piece of evidence found at the different crime scenes. The realization hit her like a punch. The Collector was recreating the murders, using her to gather the pieces. Chloe felt sick, her mind reeling. She had to stop this, but how? She decided to confront the Collector, whoever it was. She followed the clues, piecing together the locations mentioned in the old news articles. It led her to an abandoned house on the outskirts of the city, a place that reeked of decay and death. With a flashlight and a deep sense of fear, Chloe entered the house. The air was thick, almost suffocating. As she moved through the dark, dusty rooms, she found more items, each one grotesque and horrifying. And then she found the final note. "Welcome, Chloe. You are the final piece. The flashlight flickered, and in the dim light, she saw him, a tall, shadowy figure, his face hidden beneath a hood. The collector. He moved closer, and Chloe felt paralyzed with fear. His voice was an evil hiss, cold and cruel.
Thank you for helping me. Now it's time to complete the collection.
Chloe screamed, backing away, but there was nowhere to run. The wall seemed to close in on her, the darkness swallowing her whole. She felt his icy grip on her arm, pulling her into the abyss. The next morning, the police found her car outside the house. Inside, they found all the items neatly arranged, but Chloe was gone. The collector had vanished, leaving only the haunting melody of the music box playing in the empty house. The city moved on, the murders unsolved, the cases still cold. But some say, if you listen closely on a quiet night, you can still hear the music box playing, a reminder of the horrors that lurk in the shadows. And somewhere, the collector waits, ready to start his game again. In the small town of Brooksville, the annual carnival was the event of the year. Everyone looked forward to it. Bright lights, cheerful music, and the smell of cotton candy filled the air, making it a place where memories were made. But for two friends, Emma and Caroline, this carnival would become a nightmare they'd never forget. It was a warm summer night when Emma and Caroline decided to go to the carnival. They were best friends since childhood, always looking for a bit of adventure. The night started with excitement as they rode the Ferris wheel, played games, and enjoyed the vibrant atmosphere. Little did they know, someone was watching them. Someone with dark intentions. As they walked through the crowded carnival, a man in a dark hoodie and a mask that looked like a clown's face trailed them. He stayed just far enough behind to not raise suspicion, but close enough to keep them in his sight. His eyes never left them. Emma and Caroline were oblivious to the shadow that followed them. They were too busy laughing and enjoying themselves. They decided to visit the funhouse next. It was old and creaky, filled with mirrors and eerie sounds, perfect for a bit of harmless fun, they thought. As they entered the funhouse, the man in the hoodie followed. The entrance was a narrow hallway lined with distorted mirrors. Emma and Caroline laughed at their reflections, but their laughter was cut short when they noticed something strange. In one of the mirrors, they saw a figure standing behind them, watching. When they turned around, there was no one there. "Did you see that?" Emma asked, her voice shaky. "Yeah, probably just a trick mirror," Caroline replied, trying to sound confident, but even she felt a creepy chill run down her spine. They continued through the funhouse, but the feeling of being watched never left them. The corridors twisted and turned, making it easy to get lost. As they moved deeper, the sound of footsteps echoed behind them, slow, deliberate footsteps. Emma clutched Caroline's arm. "Maybe we should leave," she whispered. Caroline nodded and they quickened their pace, but no matter how fast they walked, the footsteps behind them matched their speed. When they finally reached the exit, they bolted out, breathing heavily. They looked around the carnival, trying to spot the person following them, but the crowd was too thick. The man in the hoodie had vanished. Trying to shake off the fear, they decided to get some food and sit down for a while. They found a bench near the food stalls and sat with their hot dogs and sodas. For a moment, they felt safe again, but that's when they saw him. The man in the hoodie was standing by a stall, staring at them. His clown mask was even more unsettling in the dim light. "We need to tell someone," Emma said, her voice trembling. Caroline agreed, and they went to find a security guard. They found one near the entrance and told him about the man following them. The guard nodded and assured them he would keep an eye out. Feeling slightly relieved, they decided to try and enjoy the rest of their night. They went to the haunted house next, hoping it would distract them, but the feeling of unease lingered. As they walked through the dark, narrow passages, the fear came creeping back. The haunted house was filled with actors dressed as ghosts and monsters, but the real terror was the man in the hoodie who had followed them inside. This time, he didn't keep his distance. He got closer, almost close enough to touch. Emma and Caroline felt his presence, the cold breath on their necks. They ran through the haunted house, pushing past the actors, their hearts pounding. They burst out of the exit and ran into the open, gasping for air. The man was nowhere to be seen. Panic set in as they realized they were being hunted. They couldn't go back to the carnival. They needed to leave, but the exit was on the other side of the carnival grounds. They decided to cut through the maze of booths and rides, hoping to lose him in the crowd. But as they weaved through the carnival, the man appeared again, always a step behind. It felt like they were being hunted by a deranged lunatic. They finally reached the exit, but just as they thought they were safe, the man grabbed Emma's arm. She screamed, and Caroline turned to fight him off. In the struggle, the man's mask slipped, revealing a hideously scarred face. His eyes were filled with madness. Emma managed to break free, and they ran to the parking lot. They got into Caroline's car, locked the doors, and sped away. As they looked back, they saw the man standing at the edge of the parking lot, watching them leave. His figure grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared into the night. They drove in silence, the horror of what had happened sinking in. The carnival, once a place of joy, had turned into a nightmare. They never went back to the Brooksville Carnival again. The memory of the man in the hoodie haunted them for years, a reminder that sometimes the real monsters are the ones who walk among us, hiding behind masks.